On today's episode of A Conversation with a Friend, we had the opportunity to talk to Adam. Adam is a second generation immigrant, Muslim, an accountant, and he takes a very pragmatic approach to life and uses his religion to balance out a lot of the values that he associates with things. The conversation I had with him was very interesting and also changed my perception on a lot of things on both the religion and how I'm starting to view certain things in life. I hope you guys get the same experience. If you like the conversation, please hit the like button below and click subscribe as it really helps out the channel. Well, let's get to it. Do you want to start off with like just telling a little bit about yourself or how you would describe yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, native to Calgary, born and raised, in my mid 30s, currently a professional at an oil and gas company in downtown Calgary. I've been in the industry for a number of years, so about 10 now. Um, yeah, and my off time or my time off, I like to go hiking and just outdoorsy kind of stuff. Had a kid in July, so used to like to go skiing. Haven't been out this year, but hopefully picking that back up next year. Other than that, yeah, not a whole lot to me. Oh, and I used to play video games too, but like I said, that was before I had a kid. So,
Do you think there's a big effect of having a kid? Like, was it a big adjustment for you, or were you expecting a lot of the things that were going to happen with that?
it's kind of like one of those things. Like you can quantify somewhat what happens before. So you know there's going to be a change in your sleep. You know there's going to be less time for yourself. There's going to be more things that you have to do and pick up, and yeah, there's a life you're responsible for. So you can quantify all of that before the kid comes, but then the kid comes and it becomes real, right? So
hmm
like, you can talk about, hey, I'm gonna have to sleep less, or like I can't sleep the way I used to. But again, then it's all talk till you actually have to wake up in the night. Thankfully, the wife's been pretty good about that. But like again, I think these days the most I sleep is like 6, maybe 7 hours.
Oh,
Just
jeez.
once you get up, it's the day started, right? Yeah. So yeah.
That's awesome. And do you find that there's a lot of balance between you and your wife for like how to manage the kid and stuff? Or like, did you have to negotiate a lot of stuff, or were those expectations there? Or
Um, like I don't know. I wouldn't say negotiates the thing. Like I
hmm
think you have to be cognizant. Just with me not taking pat leave and I'm at work, like to be expected that like I work my 8 and given what Suncor is currently going through my 10 hours a day, and then like you gotta be cognizant of the fact that well your wife's had this needy baby that's just constantly been attached to her, or constantly in her view, or constantly demanding her attention. So, yeah, even though you've been at work and your brain's been on or off,
hmm
like you got to come in and help, relieve her from that duty.
Yeah.
So, like, I wouldn't say like again, it really helped with me that like I my hobbies before having a kid were like video games and outdoorsy stuff. So like the outdoorsy stuff, like it's a no brainer. You can't do it. You can't get into a car for 2 hours to go hike for 4 or 6 hours and then take another 2 hour drive back, right? Like it just
hmm
that's not doable anymore. Till the kid gets older. But um and video games, whatever, right? Like so it really helped that I didn't have a whole lot of friends or hobbies in the city because it doesn't feel like I'm really giving anything up there. So just spending time with the kid.
Okay. And how are you able to manage like I'm sure there's like additional stress and stuff from all of that since you've given up a lot of your hobbies. What do you think is the release for some of that?
Just you gotta like you just gotta live in the moment in a sense, like
Right.
take count your blessings. If you're able to go to the grocery store, like yeah, going grocery shopping isn't the most exciting thing, but like at the end of the day, you're able to get out, get in a car ride, like clear your mind during the car ride. Even at the grocery store, you're able to walk around, kind of thing. Like
hmm
there's that, right? Like get out for quick little walks with or without the kid. Like again, there's plenty of things that you can do. And again, we're super fortunate, super blessed to be living in Calgary, right? Like,
hmm
um, so much stuff outdoors that you can do, like just within the city. You don't even have to drive outside of the city. So there's a
That
lot of stuff that you can still do.
that's awesome. I'm glad you were able to like adjust and figure that out. That sounds so fascinating to me. It's never even occurred to me like you can just, make an activity out of a grocery store and suddenly like that's your release. Like that
Well, it's
sounds
just like yeah, I think release might be a strong word, but like
hmm
clearing your mind or like taking a
Right.
break or just taking an opportunity to reset, right? Like
Yeah, like doing something differently than what you normally do to like
exactly
reacquaint
right.
yourself. Interesting. I feel like you can apply that to so many different things. Like that's good advice.
Well, yeah, just like I said, man, it's just like we're literally in one of the safest and nicest places in the world, right? Like
Right.
being able to go out for a drive at like 10 p.m. at night with like zero traffic, zero worries, zero bother, like that's something else, right? Like
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I gotta ask, like, I'm sure you had a criteria for what like a happy life looks for, or like what success in life looks like for you. Has that changed a lot since having a kid, or was this just on the right track for what you always envisioned for your life?
yeah, to be honest, I didn't really envision having a kid.
Oh,
Um,
right.
so like it just yeah, it is what it is.
hmm
I wouldn't say the criteria has changed. Like with my faith, I know what the criteria is,
Right, right.
or I can say I know what the criteria is.
hmm
Like whether I've internalized it properly is a different story.
hmm
But like success from a materialistic point of view is yeah, have enough money. You're not living paycheck to paycheck. You have or you own the place that you're living in. You have enough for fun activities with the family periodically.
hmm
And yeah, that's it. And like I said, we've been super blessed, super lucky here in Canada that in Calgary specifically, that's all been very doable, especially for the past few years. I think people are worried that that's starting to change, but
hmm
yeah, can't complain. So from that perspective, definitely, I don't think anything's changed. Having a kid just adds a bit of financial pressure, but
Right.
it's again super fortunate for my situation in life, right? Like
hmm
it hasn't been a deal breaker or like something I'm worried about excessively.
Yeah.
Yeah, from a faith perspective, it's just yeah, that definitely hasn't changed. If anything, it adds additional risk now, right? Like
hmm
not only you concerned about your own salvation per se, but you also gotta look after your kid and figure out now like how he's going to be raised or how they're going to be raised, how they're going to be brought up, like how you're going to teach them the values that your parents taught you that you've been taught over the past 30 odd years.
Yeah. That sounds like a lot.
Yeah,
Jeez.
it's yeah, that's the thing too though, right? Like a lot of when you think about it or when you're expecting a child, like a lot of the tension and focus is on before the kid's born, like crap, like I
hmm
gotta go buy a crib, I gotta buy this, I gotta buy that, I gotta do this to the house. And as the kid arrives and grows up, like for the first year it's more like crap, like how do I feed him, like how do I do this, how do I do that, how do I make sure this thing stays alive. But as the kid gets older, it's like and like I guess you talk to doctors or or you read like mommy magazines, like, limit screen time for the kids, and they're talking more from perspective of like, well, you don't want to hinder growth, or you want to create this dependency, or like you don't want something physically going wrong with the child or psychologically going wrong with the child because you've exposed them too much to a screen per se.
Right.
And like from a values perspective, a morals perspective, it's also like, well, you got to realize kids are like sponges. We're all like sponges, really. We take in our environment around us, but like kids, especially, like they're starting to learn, they're starting to absorb, right? So like, what values, what morals, what beliefs are coming in through those devices, and not just devices, just society at large, right? Like,
Yeah.
and some stuff's good, like wash your hands, brush your teeth, say please and thank you, right?
Yeah.
And other stuff not so much. So that's where it's like, well, this is how we live, right? And maybe well, what would I be considered? My parents would be first gen, I'd be a second gen immigrant, right?
hmm
Like like I guess growing up the way we did, um, and this the way society was when we were growing up, like I think that was a bit easier. Now it's a bit harder to navigate that.
Hmm. Yeah, I think we can see that in ourselves as well, right? We're exposed to so many different things all the
And
time.
we also like, we've had like years and years of being raised in a way where like, our parents were first gen immigrants, so like, it was easier to kind of have that connection to the culture, the back home, and
Hmm.
the religion came along with that. And whether that was right or wrong is a different discussion. But like,
Right.
the next generation won't have that. Like, they're gonna see that mom and dad grew up here. Like, they kind of fit in with the locals, and yeah, they got this religious thing too. But like,
Yeah.
whereas yeah, so like, yeah, it's something from a religious perspective, like in terms of priorities, yeah, that's definitely something that's been added on, but the criteria is still the same, right?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Actually, speaking on that, did you find that you had a lot of difficulty like growing up here in regards to the dichotomy between like, Western culture versus integrating our own cultures and our own values? Or was like for me it was a bit of a struggle. So I'm kind of curious on your thoughts. Like did you find that to be quite
Yeah,
difficult?
it definitely was, but like at the end of the day, like it's stuff that you don't realize when you're like 16, 18, even 20, 22, 23, right? But as
Hmm.
you get older, it starts to become more apparent that like, like assisted activities that people were doing in high school and like
Right.
even university. It's like shit, I kind of wish I could do that.
Yeah,
Right?
well,
Like
yeah.
for lack of a better term, like it looks fun, it looks good, and here I am, and like, the most I got a pizza party at a mosque like once a year to look for. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But
that
then
was
as you
good
grow
pizza though,
older,
dude.
yeah, fair enough. As you get older, it's like, like you realize that like that path,
Mhm,
it doesn't like, at the end of the day, you look at all my friends or like all the people that I went to school with, and you see what they're doing in their late 20s and 30s, and it's like, well, like, settling down, having a family, that kind of thing. Like, well, I guess my point, like, my thing is, my point of view is that like what's right doesn't change, right?
mhm,
The right thing to do doesn't change, or the right way to live your life doesn't necessarily change. And albeit there is like, you do different things at different stages in your life, but
mhm.
if the activities that my friends or the people that I went to school with, what they were doing at 18 and throughout undergrad, if if a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old was doing the same activities, even current day society would be like, what a loser, right? So
Yeah, true.
it's one of the weird things about Western society where we kind of look at like what people are doing in their 18s and 20s, and we're like when they're in their teens, when they're in
Mhm,
young adult years, and we're like, well, that's okay to do, or they're just getting it out of their system, or
mhm.
it's the time to do that. And it's like, but if you wouldn't be okay with a 30-year-old doing that, then
Yeah.
like why is it okay for them to be doing it? And that's my perspective. Yeah, it was hard, but
Yeah, and you know what? I guess like it sounds to me like there's a difference between like accepting that other people are having that behavior, but like you're saying at this age, a lot of it is more analogous with each other, right? Like the end goal is the same, where we're heading towards everything. Um,
well, the way we live our lives, yeah, I
yes.
guess.
So, do you
Um,
find it easier now to connect with people from different cultures, or like, did you ever have a struggle before
I
to do that?
I don't think I ever had a struggle. Like you can like if a person's willing to talk, if a person's willing to walk, like I,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there is a struggle connecting with people. Like and
Mm-hmm.
that's part of like our belief teaches us to be empathetic to people, right, and their
Mm-hmm.
plight and understand people.
Yeah, although
So
very
like
difficult to do.
it can be right. Like you got
Hmm.
to keep an open mind. I think like just because somebody's doing something, you talking to them doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with everything
Right.
that they're doing. Like and like yeah, I use the word friend loosely, but having an acquaintance or a friend or person that you frequently talk to, again, same thing. Doesn't mean because you have that kind of relationship that you're 100% on board with everything that they do, that they stand for, or vice versa, that they're okay with everything that you do or that you stand for, right? And that's just the human experience, right? Like,
Right.
um, yeah.
Okay, so going back to what you said at the beginning as well about like hiking and like skiing and stuff. Did you find that was like have you always done that or was that something that you had to like slowly integrate towards to be able to figure out those hobbies and those activities?
I mean, it definitely helped that I grew up in Calgary. Um, right? So like
Uh,
having the mountains close by, even like as kids and Brown family, right? Like we
yeah,
didn't do it very often, but like, my father would take the family over to Kananaskis, Banff, and we'd, do things over there and like mini hikes and stuff. And as I got older in university, it was kind of like, like I obviously I'm not going to go night clubbing, I'm not going to go drinking, I'm not going to go do this other stuff. But the one
right.
thing that I could do and that my friends would also do is this outdoorsy kind of stuff. So it was hiking. I didn't do skiing till I was late into my 20s. It's an
Right.
expensive sport, so
Yeah,
yeah,
it
but yeah,
is.
that's how I got into it. And like again, I think, and you'll see this, like this was probably late 2009 2010 kind of thing when I really
Yeah.
got into it. And it was for society as a whole here, like it wasn't it was still really, it was still like a good activity, and it was still like something that a lot of people did. But I think in the last 10-15 years it's really taken off. Like it's a little more widely accepted, widely done. Like it's something that people really want to do more so than it was 10-15 years ago. I think social media has played a big role in that. But
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And was primarily the reason that you like got into hiking because of the exercise portion and because of like, it was something you could actually do besides nightclubs and stuff? Or is there something more with related to like being outdoorsy and hiking and stuff? Like do you feel more at peace there or is it
Yeah,
just
it definitely started off as something else to do, but I think, yeah, like really quickly you found out that it was something different. Just being in nature, going out, like the exercise piece was something else too. But like just being surrounded by stuff that wasn't man-made, and not having your phone on you, not being surrounded by people, not being surrounded by sounds of cars, like that's something else too, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That makes sense. The serenity of it all, right? That's awesome.
Serenity and just seeing, like, the power of God's creation, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
seeing the beauty
So,
of it all. Yeah, I guess that's
yeah.
what I think some people fa fail to like understand. It's just like, when you look at the things around you, it's something beyond your normal comprehension sometimes, right? Which is
Well,
kind
definitely. And it's like, we're so surrounded by, like, we're so, like, we see nice cars and we're like, oh my God, what a nice car. We see nice houses and we have the same reaction. Like, people go to like different cities and see different man-made structures of buildings, like the Eiffel Tower, CN Tower. Like people
hmm
go to Dubai and see all these crazy buildings, and it's like, their initial reaction is like, oh wow, they're blown away, right? But our religion teaches us that, like, if you're really looking out for the signs of God, or you're really thinking about this kind of stuff, that you go out and you see the creation of God. And it's like, if you really think about it, you realize that's much more amazing than a car or a building or a house created
hmm
by man would be, right? Like,
Yeah, can't
so.
exactly make a mountain, right? So out of nothing.
Well, even like it's not just a mountain, right? Even the flower, you look at the intricate design and you look at how everything kind of plugs and plays with one another. Like, yeah, it's a flower, but then that flower, produces a nectar at a certain time of year, and then you can have like a bee come over there, and that bee comes and like it takes seeds from plant to plant, and in order for these flowers to propagate, I guess the point is like the design of the flower itself is intricate and complicated, but the way that flower fits into that ecosystem, that too is really intricate and interconnected, right? Like,
Right. And then, sorry, I'm switching points again, but for the working in an oil and gas company, what inspired that? Like, how have you pursued your career in that sense?
yeah, I got a weird story. Like, I did an undergrad in one thing, and then I worked in another thing while doing my undergrad, and then I switched over to this other field of study. So I was all over the map
Right.
in my teens, and I guess undergrad. Honestly, oil and gas just, I wasn't planning on it. It just worked out that
Mm-hmm.
it went that way, and I'd say like, my first real job actually in downtown Calgary was oil and gas adjacent. It was development, or being on software development teams for oil and gas companies. So
Right.
I wasn't a developer, but I was a business analyst, and I would like do business analyst type work for oil and gas software, which was then sold to oil and gas companies, and then that translated into an actual more of a technical role at an oil and gas company, a big oil and gas company down in Calgary. And I'd say that's where I really got like thrown off the deep end, as
Yeah.
in like that's where I really got to learn, right? Like this
Hmm.
is how you make things work, this is how you look at things, this is how you analyze things, this is how you communicate, this is how you talk to others, the whole nine yards. And yeah,
And
so it wasn't definitely planned to go into oil and gas. It was just
yeah.
something in Calgary, and I guess right place, right time.
So, do you think like the like for just right place, right time, but what part of it resonated with you? Like you were saying for hiking, it was like eventually it turned into a thing where, you're starting to see the intricacies around the things around you, as well as it's a good time to exercise. But for career-wise, is it as you were saying, like you want to make enough money and whatnot to like, just not have to worry about that kind of stuff? But for your career, like like since you were moving around a lot, what part of it actually like resonated with you that this is it, this is what I enjoy? Or was that part of the criteria, or was it just like it got comfortable?
Um, so like in terms of like enjoyment, I don't like, there are good days at work and there are
Hmm.
bad days. I don't think the work itself leads to enjoyment. I think like the problem solving and the people aspect that definitely has, or it's the more enjoyable
Hmm.
part. I always joke that like, working customer service type roles in my like I've done a few of those type of roles in my life, and those, even though they paid, I think minimum wage way back when was like $12 an hour, working that was more satisfying at the end of the day because you actually got to help people and solve problems that affected people, whereas now it's kind of like it's such a small piece in such a large org that like you can't really see the impact in a person's life. Like, you can write it down on a paper, like you can kind of see the big picture, step back and look at the big picture, but it's hard to internalize that and
Hmm.
come or translate that into a feeling of that, yeah, you actually helped somebody. But so I'd say like right now it's just like, hey, I solved the problem, or I made something better, or um like I talked to somebody and like, we had a good 30-minute chat, and like I'd say that's where quote unquote enjoyment comes from nowadays.
All right.
I've always been a bit more pragmatic, right? Like
Hmm.
my first undergrad degree, I realized pretty quickly that like, I came out with an undergrad, there wasn't a whole lot of job opportunities. The 2008 recession had just hit, and it was like, well, I can go do a master's slash a PhD in this field, and then realize that I spent all this time, and the most I can still get is 40 to 60K a year, working way too many hours a week. So like I was always a bit pragmatic about that, where it's like, again, coming from a Brown family helps, right? Like
Hmm.
at the end of the day, like, people say like, if you do what you truly love, you'll never work a day in your life, and I think that's BS.
Right.
I think, like I love so many different things, but if I had to do it day in, day out, I realize that there's going to be days where I'm not going to love it, but it's still going to need to get done. So,
Hmm.
um, bit pragmatic that way. And I guess the one thing like about my field that I'm in accounting, that I like is like you can do a whole bunch of stuff with it. It just doesn't have to be accounting, right? Like,
Hmm.
there's this whole data analytics piece, there's this whole like business development piece. There's so many things that you can do with an accounting background. And that's what I like about it. It's super versatile. I've done a number of roles in the past few years, and again, I don't have, I didn't have to go back to school and do a different certificate or degree. I definitely had to, do some continuing education slash self-paced type learning online myself, but
Hmm.
that was optional too. I think like that's the best thing I like about it, that it's not necessarily specific to oil and gas, but just the field that I'm in. Like if 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 you market it right and you
Yeah.
develop it right, like you can definitely switch to quite a bit.
Yeah, it sounds like you like so you like challenging yourself a little bit, or learning, or finding those opportunities to improve through your career, right? That's what seems
Yeah,
to be
a
resonating with
mix
me.
of all of the above. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you find any, because you said that what resonated with you the most was like, or continues to resonate with you is like having one-on-one conversations or like looking for opportunities where there's a direct impact on people's lives. Do you think that going forward or at any point there's going to be more of a priority towards that? Is that a big success criteria for you for your career or?
If the opportunity presents itself, like I realize as you get older and like, you get positions with more responsibility or more oversight, more breadth, more depth, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the chance that you're going to be able to like directly impact a person's life or make a betterment in someone's life personally, like unless you're like something like a criminal defense lawyer or like a lawyer or a doctor, like I think that's a bit harder to do, right? Like a social worker, whatever, or police officer, firefighter, like that's going to be a bit harder to do. And um, so yeah, I think I've kind of like for that, I'd like again volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
That's a better way of doing it. Even for that, like you don't go to volunteer necessarily to help people. At least our faith teaches us that you do it for God, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Right.
that's a secondary benefit, and that's also something that you really got to watch out for, like this thought that like I helped this person, and it's like no, like God helped this person, he
Right.
used you to do it, but like and if anything they've helped you, right? Like when you donate money, people think, well, I'm donating money to cause, I'm helping, but in reality you don't see it. At least our faith teaches us that, well, no, actually it's by virtue of that person being there to take that money that they're deserving of, that like additional benefits and harms are prevented from coming to you in the community as a large. Anyways, off topic there,
No,
but
no, no. This is interesting. I never thought of it that way, to be honest. Although I feel like I should have.
no, it's something that's really, and like our faith teaches us, and it's beautiful, right? That like be very humble. Just because you have money and you're giving it out,
Yeah.
don't think of it as you giving it out. It was never your money to begin with. It
Hmm.
came from God, and God can take it away. So you're kind of spending money that's really entrusted to you.
Yeah.
And B, yeah, and B is like, like you're giving it to somebody, but if there was nobody to give that money to, if there were no worthy causes, then A, how would you purify your wealth? How would you get those blessings? How would you have that reward for donating? Like the harms that are prevented in a society, in a community, or personally that are prevented from reaching a person because of donations, like how would those harm, like God
Hmm.
works in many different ways and there's many different avenues, but like just because you're giving money doesn't mean that you're not getting anything back, and I would argue that what you get back is far more than what you put in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just like when you're like trying to help someone just by even talking to them, right? Like you're getting so many
Yeah,
good nuggets, but the signaling there is a little more obvious because you're talking to
yeah,
someone and expressing your thoughts. But interesting. I never thought of it from the money aspect. Well, and not in the sense like I assumed like everyone's like,
yeah,
like of course there's humility and all that stuff because money can also be taken away just as quickly and you could be the person on the other end.
yeah.
That's how I always saw it. But that's so interesting. Okay. Cool. And then sorry, now I'm trying to get my thoughts straight. And then did you find that balancing out like the religious aspects and your faith with your work has that been tricky or like is that some like what would you recommend to someone to be able to navigate some of that? Like I personally see as someone who's done it very successfully. That's why I thought it would be a good talking point.
Yeah, like again, I speak from a position of privilege, right? Like
Hmm.
I'm working a white collar job, so it's office based for the most part. I've worked for really decent people in Calgary, and honestly, none of my managers have had the same faith as me. Worked for some, like all the companies that I've worked for, they've been really accepting and good for that. And the roles that I've worked, they haven't had the kind of hours or demands that, other companies or other roles might have, which would make it harder. So I would say, like, if your faith is important, then when you're picking a career, like, do your best to try something that would accommodate your faith.
Right.
So for our faith, if we look at it, it's the five daily prayers, it's fasting in Ramadan, it's um Friday prayers, like there's different aspects to your faith. Everybody knows it best. And I'm not saying it in the sense that, well, don't go become a bartender. That's an obvious no-no for multiple reasons. But like, again, this is again coming from a place of privilege. I was privileged enough to do that. Like,
Hmm.
you see immigrants or even refugees having to pick up trade jobs, then that's a tough thing because you got to work to put money on the table. The work you do is backbreakingly exhausting. What do you do in Ramadan?
Right.
Like it's hard. It's really hard, right? Like to answer that. So say if you have the privilege, if you have the opportunity, keep that in mind, right? Like
Yeah.
where like as a Muslim I can't work in a bank, for example, or I shouldn't be working in a bank because
Hmm.
the primary source or the streams of revenue that a bank has Islamically come from you know places where people shouldn't be getting money from. So like again, if you're going to do a major in finance, for example, like think about a plan B. Like it's okay to have a major in finance, but have a plan B or have an idea of how you're going to do that. Even when you graduate, it could be an accounting degree, right? Like
Hmm.
again, first jobs are always tricky. You kind of grab whatever you can to get your foot in the door and get those first few years of experience, right? But
Yeah.
even then, think to yourself that like, well, what am I doing, right? Like, for example, if you're going to pick up a management consulting type of job that requires you to work like 100 hours a week,
Hmm.
like and it's not just faith, like, or what's your family life gonna look like? Some people they're okay with doing that in their 20s, but for example, in their 30s, I don't know how many more people can work 100-hour weeks, right?
Hmm. No, and
So I'd say
I
if you have the privilege, take that as a consideration. We all take money into consideration when we're picking careers or we're picking jobs. We all look at like, hey, what's the salary going to be?
yeah.
But
Hmm.
I think it's equally important to consider, hey, what's my work-life balance going to be too, right?
Yeah, and it sounds to me like you're saying like identify what you truly value or what your ideas of what you're willing on compromising on versus not compromising on, and use that to make sure that what you're doing doesn't go against you or what you truly believe in, right? And
Yeah, to a degree, I think like honestly, as an accountant, it just comes down to like, numbers on a paper. To my thing is like quantify things,
mhm,
right? We find a lot of times that people like in business analysis problems, like, they'll only look at half the picture and quantify half the picture, and the other picture they won't quantify. And it's like, well, that gives you a bad answer. The same thing with people, the way they make their life decisions, right? Like
right.
like a job offer with 20 extra grand, and I'll be like they'll be all over that. But then even from like a dollars and cents perspective, you look at it, but well, hey, wait a minute, your workload's going up 30%, your hours going up 40%, but you're white collar, so you're not getting overtime. Your hourly rate actually went down, but you're making 20 grand more, but you're making less per hour, right?
Yeah.
But like that's just from a dollars and cents perspective. But it's
Mhm.
like, well, you're not allowed as much for your kid. Your significant other has to pick up way more of the slack at home. Like your parents who are getting old, you're seeing less of them because of this. Like that's not quantified.
Yeah.
The only thing that's quantified is the 20 grand extra that you're getting for this, right? Like even the hours aren't quantified, even though it has a direct impact on like a KPI, quote unquote, for, your comp per hour. So
Right.
I
No,
guess my
no.
thing as an accountant is just quantify things, right? Like make
Yeah.
sure you're looking at the whole picture.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Do you think that you apply that to your relationships as well? Like, do you quantify like friendships or like when you were looking for a significant other, was that part of one through your head, or is the criteria different between like quantify things for your career, which I think is probably a lot easier than in relationship wise?
Uh, say yes and no. Like, I mean, obviously, you're not gonna. It's hard to quantify certain things versus other things, but
Hmm.
I like maybe I'd still say the theory behind it. I look at the big picture and account for like different variables. I think that still holds true, whether you account for them or whether you analyze them via quantitative factor versus a qualitative factor. That's depends on the person, right? Like how do you put a quantitative factor on like certain aspects of a relationship?
Right.
So and like friendships, probably not. Like my thing for friendships has always been like, like I ideally go into a friendship expecting nothing.
Yeah,
Expect to
okay.
help the other person, but don't expect anything out of a friendship. And I think that's where it just comes down to I think this is in a lot of places in life, right? Like whether it be career, job, company, whatever it is, like expectations management, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're gonna go in looking for fulfillment or looking for something from a person, like there's a chance that you're gonna be disappointed because people just it's human nature. I disappoint multiple people in a day, right? Like hopefully
Yeah.
not, but if I think about it, like I disappoint other people, right? So like how can I expect other people to never disappoint me?
No,
Yeah.
and I agree with that. To be honest, that's been one of my biggest thinking points, especially in this year, because like I think people forget the value of the fact that the only action that's in your control are your own, right? Like you can never control results. You can hope for something, but it's not going to happen, and thereby, what can you manage but your expectations
Yeah.
from things, right? And this is much more powerful than like I think people give it credit for, especially in this day and
Well,
age.
yeah, especially like, and I hate to see it. Like you see in society, there's like, and especially with like, I'm speaking as a person of color, but like, you
Mhm,
see this whole thing on like systemic racism and like prejudice and like, all this other stuff. And like, there is a whole lot of truth to that. Don't get me wrong, but I
mhm.
think the message that is sending to a lot of people too is that like, it's not your fault.
Right.
And yeah, you're right. It might not be your fault, but at the end of the day, like, you can come here and bitch about the system or bitch about the way it's done, or you can try to change it. That's option A, but change won't happen overnight. But
Mhm.
point B is that like you can work to be twice as good as the guy next to you.
Right.
And I'll tell you right now that it was true in my father's day. It's true in my day. Like, it doesn't even matter what the color of your skin is. They might be more relevant depending on what the color of your skin is. But
Mhm.
even if you have two white guys next to one another, like, I can guarantee you 9 times out of 10, there'll be all that odd exception and there'll be politics and whatnot. But 9 times out of 10, a person that outworks the other person, that person will get ahead.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree with that. And honestly, I think that's one of the things that people forget is that you have a certain responsibility to improve yourself and to do what you can to like, be the best you can be, depending on what your priorities are, right? Like, because everyone's success factors are different. Someone might
Oh,
find
yeah.
success in just being a mother of three kids, right? Like that's her goal and that's what she wants to do. Or someone else might want to be a dad that's like a stay-at-home dad, and he wants to marry someone rich and like wants to make her happy. Like that's depending on what you want to do. You still gotta like take responsibility for your own actions. You can't just expect something, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, right? Like manage your expectations, but I think at the same time keep your expectations realistic. And
Hmm.
arguably that's step one in expectations management. But like also the thing is be adaptable, right? Like
Hmm.
if you recognize a situation, it's one thing to recognize that there's something wrong with the situation. It's another thing to change it in the short term as well as change it in the long term. And both those things look very different, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, what are some tips you would give to people for setting like I'm gonna call them goals because I don't know if that's the right word for this, but like setting goals in the short term versus the long term. Like, how do you look at that? Do you consider long term goals to be like a big thing and stuff, or is that not really a thing and you believe more in taking it day by day? Like, I'm sure having a kid, it's probably changed a lot because I'm sure
Like I
a
think
lot.
for the long term, you can like I don't know how much value there is in like saying like there might be for some people depending on what your aspirations
Hmm.
are. Like like I want to own a business and I want that business to have like whatever, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say like I think for most people there'd be a lot more value in having short term goals and like
Hmm.
holding people or holding oneself accountable on those short-term goals, right?
Hmm.
For the long-term goals, I think it's important to still have some line of sight to them and just maybe have them at a higher level.
Right, right. So make sure that your short term goals are not so far away from where your long term desires are, but
Yeah, even for the
don't get.
short term, right?
Mhm.
Like you could have daily goals, like people call them task lists, right? Like you could
Yeah.
have monthly goals, you could have a goal, right? Like what do you want to get done by the end of the year? And like, in corporate culture, like you have that. You have your yearly performance review, and part of that performance review is like, well, what are your goals for the year?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. I find goal setting for a lot of people to be very difficult just because it's very hard to relate it to why you actually want to do something. Like for corporate goals, I mean, it's probably a little more obvious because you have a manager that's guiding you and like indicating to you, this is where we want the company to go. But for someone's personal life where there's this giant gray area,
Well,
like,
I kind of disagree with that. Like, at
hmm
least in mine, like I've never like the manager's really kind of given me like two goals, and it's more like boilerplate, but this is for the whole group, right? But like,
hmm
I think it's just you gotta be able to. It's kind of like having a business, right? You gotta
right.
identify the market, right? You gotta identify your own business in the market, right?
hmm
So the same thing with your life. Like, what am I doing well? What am I not doing so well? And what am I doing not at all that I need to be doing, right? Like,
Right.
and you can look at that from multiple aspects. Like, with COVID, like eating too much, not getting enough exercise, like, my goal should be, and like, now everybody has, like these, things on their wrists, the computers on their wrists, right? Like,
Right.
people really don't have an excuse, right? Like, if your
hmm
watch is telling you that, hey, you stood up for a grand total of 3 hours today, like maybe something's wrong. Like, set that as a goal. But like, that's that identifying that there is a problem is step one in problem solving. So like,
That is true.
right? Like, I don't like I think it's as simple as that sometime, right? Like, hey, I'm spending way too much money for what I make, or even if I made that, if even if I made more, I'm spending too much money on XYZ. How do I cut some of these expenses, or how do I better use that money, right? Like,
hmm
hey, I'm spending way too much time on my device or on my screen. If you're a
Yeah.
person of faith, hey, I haven't gone to the mosque at all this week or this month, kind of thing. Or I've, like, the copy of my holy book is sitting on a shelf collecting dust.
hmm
Like, yeah, I think it can be as simple as that. I don't think you need a manager to guide you for that. Like, that'll be a skill that'll serve you well in multiple areas and for a long, long time in your life, where have like a retrospective look at what you've done just in the last day, last week, and say, hey, how can I make a small improvement, and just keep building on that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the difference is for me, I find it's very difficult for people to be introspective or retrospective to identify what their flaws and weaknesses are. Like like you said, you're a lot more pragmatic with this stuff, but I don't find most people are. Like it's very difficult to even get
I,
there.
I think everybody can do it. It's not like it takes like complicated calculus
True.
or, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, honestly, it's just really turn the eyeball inside, right? Like, look inwards, and
hmm
you're smart. Most people are smart enough. I'd say 99% of the people are smart enough to say, hey, yeah, I can totally do like this, or stop doing this or this, right? Like,
Yes, absolutely. Well, you would hope.
I think like you're smart enough to do it, but like whether people have the willpower to execute on it right away, that's a
True.
different story. But like,
That's true as
at
well.
least identification part, like,
Yeah.
it's not rocket science.
Yeah. And if you don't mind me asking as well, so I'm kind of curious on this one. Relationship-wise, like finding love and things like that. What do you find is like the best way for someone to navigate that part of their life? Like, is there certain criterias you think people should be looking for? Is it more on the value side of thing, or?
I think like, I think like there's a prophetic tradition out there that says, like, women are looked at for four things, like their beauty, their wealth, their lineage, and their religion, right?
hmm
And um, a lot of people will be, and I think the end of that tradition goes that, like, the best is, or blessed, I can't remember how it ends, but places emphasis on the religious factor. Um, and I've read different commentaries on it, and different speeches have touched upon it. But I think like there's two things. One is that, yeah, keep that in mind, that your values, your morals are number one. That a person could be wealthy, a person could be beautiful, but if their morals and their religious values are out to lunch or not in line with yours,
hmm
then like that wealth, that beauty, it won't help you a whole lot.
Yeah,
Like, and
that
if
makes sense.
anything, could be used against you, right?
hmm
Whereas, but I think there was also wisdom in those other 3 points being mentioned aside from religion, right?
hmm
That at
Right.
the end of the day, we're human beings, like we're attracted to beauty. So yeah, definitely plays a role. The wealth part, like, I, I I know what tradition is regarding how, like, financial responsibilities are split in a marriage, but the reality is that we're living in a country where, like, if your spouse isn't earning anything and is a stay-at-home parent, there are going to be financial consequences slash burdens on you if that
Mm-hmm.
relationship goes south.
Right.
And like, I think it's important to understand those consequences before saying that, hey, I'm okay with you being a stay-at-home parent for the entire duration of our relationship. Not saying it's a wrong thing or it's a bad decision. It's just, I think you
No,
should
you.
have an A to Z picture of that, right?
Yeah,
Every
you're just saying
contract
being
that we
real.
sign,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, every contract we sign, every business partnership that's out there, whether it be from your utility company to two oil and gas companies having like a joint venture agreement on like how to drill a piece of land, like, there's
Yeah.
always a section in those contracts, whether it be with your cell phone provider or utility company, what happens when this relationship ends,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's not there, like, you don't go in there thinking that, like, well, my relationship with this is going to end or this business deal is going to go south. It's just, hey, like, if it does, we know it's, it's something that can happen. We're not hoping for it to happen. It's something that
Right.
can happen. If it does happen, this is like, this is what we're writing down. It's just so everyone's aware of what their responsibilities and rights are, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
the same thing, I find like a lot of people get married and it's like just like, I'm not saying you got to think about the future ending,
Right.
but have an understanding of what happens if that thing does go south.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree with that. That makes a lot of sense, right? It's about being very, very real, because especially in the moment, is like when it comes to things like love and lust and things like that, like it can get lost in the fact that we're all evolving human beings, right? And it is very possible to still grow apart. That's not saying that it's gonna happen, but being aware of it just makes makes sense
Yeah.
to me.
Well, it's just like this is so there are no surprises kind of thing. Like obviously
Hmm.
everything's off the table when it comes in front of a judge, but like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, like, it's one thing, and I've seen this, like guys go and like, hey, I really want to stay at home wife, and like I want the mother of my children to just be with my children, and then come divorce time, it's like, well, that bitch is taking me for like 50% of my stuff, and like she's asking for alimony, and I already got to pay child support, and like, yeah, like, you know what? But at the end of the day, like, if you live in a land and you sign a contract under the law of that land, then you're responsible for knowing what
Knowing what's
what
gonna
that
happen.
entails, right?
Yeah, do your homework.
Yeah, exactly. And like the government has a vested interest too, right? They don't want to see like spouses that have spent like, 5, 10, 20, 30 years of their life, like really looking after the family. They weren't getting a paycheck for it. Sure, like room and board was getting covered, but then all of a sudden it's like, well, that relationship ended. What's this person supposed to do?
Yeah.
Like the
Hmm.
government has a vested interest in making sure that situation like is resolved fairly. Not that the government does a very good job of that, but
Dude, the government is an ever-evolving process.
the government doesn't do a good job on anything really. But yeah. So
Yeah.
like in terms of navigating it, yeah, I'd say like I think that those are pretty good words. Like, again, expectations management, be realistic. Like
Hmm.
if you're a five and you go looking for a 10 and say, I'm never gonna look get married unless it's like a supermodel, like yeah, that's not realistic, right?
Yeah.
If you're 35 years old and you're like, I only want to marry somebody that's under 25, there's going to be trade-offs, right? Like, so be realistic, and at the end of the day, keep in mind that like money comes and goes. Same thing with looks, but
Hmm.
if a person has good character, good morals, good values, good religion,
Yeah.
um, that's important. Not saying the other stuff isn't, but I'd say priority has to be there.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and honestly, it simplifies a lot of, how people look at this stuff, right? There's some people with lists which are like 30 pages long, and it's like, good luck.
Yeah, if you have a 30-page list like that, I thank you for doing a service to the other person because,
Yeah,
right? Like,
makes
it's
it a
like,
little
yeah,
easy.
no, it just makes the weeding out process a bit easier. You have a 30-page list, that's great. Like, all the power to you. But yeah, I'm not that kind of guy.
Yeah, and I find a lot of guys also get stuck in the fact that, like, I want this girl, I need this girl, and then they forget that this girl or this, and the other way as well, or this like other person is like, not necessarily like the person you're thinking. You're just chasing them for the sake of like chasing them at a certain point. You're getting stuck without actually evaluating it properly, which is totally fair because when it comes to like feelings of the heart and things like that, right? It's very easy to get lost in the weeds of things. But I think the approach you're suggesting makes a lot more sense, which is like look at the basic stuff. Remember that, you don't necessarily need someone to meet a specific criteria, right? And like I don't know, for me there's like a certain level of you need to identify your own self-worth before you can actually like pursue someone else. So
I think that just goes to expectation management again, being introspective, right? Like,
mm,
hey, what do I bring to the table? Who am I, kind of thing, right?
yes. Yeah, like you said, the 35 versus 20, that's a good
Well, it just comes down like in finance, they teach you about like the efficient market hypothesis, and unfortunately, especially in Muslim communities, the market, the marriage market, is anything but efficient, right? Like,
right.
so like you see all kind of wacky like demands and expectations being completely out to lunch based on what a person's actually bringing to the table, what's even available on the market, right? Like it's so yeah.
You have
And
officially
to be fair,
quantified marriage. I'm gonna
yeah,
put that.
it's not even the Muslim community to be fair. Like,
Yeah.
you go look on the stats on Tinder or Match.com, like, like exact same thing that like, 20% or maybe the top 10% of people in terms of looks got 90% of the swipes, right? Like,
Mm.
and then anyways, yeah, topic for a different day.
No, but that's I never even thought about. Well, I guess I did. I just always write that stuff off
Yeah.
because like it's not in my head in that way. So that's interesting.
No, it
And
it just goes to show that like, that like what's that thing for like stock trading? The bid ask or
yeah, the
the spread, right?
yep,
Spread.
bid ask spread. Yep,
Yeah. So like
the offer and
similar
sellers.
thing, but the spread over here is just freaking through the roof and beyond, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah, and you can also argue like there's different expectations for like guys versus girls and like what's actually being compromised on or brought to the table. Like I don't imagine that someone like that looks like a supermodel is necessarily looking for another supermodel either, right? Like there's probably a lot more like they're more
maybe.
comfortable with themselves. That's true, but yeah,
Uh,
they could be.
hey,
They could be. You're not wrong. They
yeah.
could be, but interesting. Interesting. Okay. Well, I think that's all I really had. No, thank you for covering all of that. That covered like a full range of topics. Do you have any other like closing thoughts or anything you want to like say to people to think about?
Oh, yeah, I think I'm good, man.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for like doing this. Like, I really appreciate